Hi and welcome back to ScottiesTech.Info. I'm Scotty with my co-host Cletus. So the last video I did was about the hidden dangers of 5G. You can watch that video if you'd like. There were a number of comments and it made me realize I need to talk about millimeter wave a little bit more, because many of the comments were basically people saying, basically assuming that all 5G is millimeter wave. So while I was looking into this, I discovered some other interesting things. So this video is actually going to be about a couple different things. But first of all, a quick review of 5G and its various flavors. So when we look at 4G, you kind of have like 1.7 gigahertz up to like, I think it's like 2.4 gigahertz in some places. It's kind of a fixed frequency band. It's evolved over time. The sort of modulation schemes, the protocols used, the data rates have changed over time. 5G is a little bit different. You're going to have three main frequency bands that it uses. So you have like 700 or 800 megahertz, which is very low frequency, and that's going to be used primarily by little Internet of Things gizmos, supposedly, kind of like long range, low power, very low data rate. Then there's going to be this kind of mid-band, this mid-frequency range that they usually call the sub-6 gigahertz band, and that's going to be anywhere from roughly 2 gigahertz, kind of like 4G, up to potentially up to 6 gigahertz, but typically nowadays they're using, I think mostly they're using like 2.4 gigahertz and primarily in the 3 gigahertz range, like 3.1, 3.2, 3.4, 3.5 gigahertz, that sort of thing. So this mid-band 5G range is kind of like what everyone is using right now for the most part, but I'll get to that in a second. That's a faster data rate than the low frequency band, and it has longer range. It's kind of like more for rural areas. You don't need 200 times as many antennas as you do with millimeter wave. So it's kind of like the sweet spot, because this sort of mid frequency, this gigahertz, single gigahertz, 2, 3, 4, 5 gigahertz, that's kind of the range that sort of fits everyone, rural, cities, everywhere. And it's kind of closer to the whole 4G system, even though with this new 5G flavor, the data rates should be even higher than with 4G. And then finally, you have millimeter wave, and that's like, depending on who you ask, anywhere from 20 gigahertz up to 300 gigahertz. And this is, of course, the stuff that penetrates, a few millimeters into your skin. There's one study showing that it affects the sweat ducts in your skin. People are worried it has effects on the eyeballs, all kinds of stuff. These are the frequencies that are used for like these body scanners and that sort of thing, or will be eventually. Millimeter wave is the one that has the phased array antennas that are kind of steerable beams. And so then the power levels come into play, because instead of an antenna that's kind of covering like, sort of like a sliver of a city, you have these steerable beams, and they're saying, oh, well, the power levels are fine because it's not any greater than 4G. Well, yeah, it kind of is, because instead of a beam like this, it's like a pencil beam that's steerable. So like, obviously that's different, regardless of what the FCC says. And this millimeter wave is, at the moment, the only flavor of 5G where you're actually going to get data rates up to, again, it depends on who you ask, 10 gigabits per second officially. Some people are saying 20 gigabits per second. There's a lot of confusion over 5G, and I'll show you some more in a second. So the idea here is that millimeter wave has already been deployed primarily in big cities. For example, in the US, I think it's Verizon, they're all into the millimeter wave. In European cities, for example, there are many cities, usually big cities, and they have millimeter wave deployed. So it's not as easy as just saying, uh-oh, 5G is here, it's millimeter wave, because very often right now it's not millimeter wave, it's the sub-6 gigahertz band. Millimeter wave requires installing like a gajillion times more antennas. It has a very short range. It's affected by rain fade, like raindrops, attenuate the pencil beam signals and stuff. It can't pass through walls. It can't pass through anything. It doesn't even pass through the human body. It's blocked by darn near everything, which is why they never used these millimeter wave frequencies for mobile telecommunications before, because it's kind of problematic. But of course, Internet of Things, super high data rates, blah, blah, blah. So, okay, that's kind of a recap of 5G is not necessarily millimeter wave. It's one of three different things. And all of those things together we call 5G. But at this point, you're probably, maybe you're in the market for a new phone, and you're going, well, many of the ones available, they look good, but they include 5G. So how do I know that my phone doesn't have millimeter wave? Maybe you just want a normal flavor of 5G, the lower frequencies, and you want to sort of avoid the millimeter wave thing as much as possible. Can you actually tell that the phone you're buying doesn't have millimeter wave? Okay, so here we are. Let's say you want to buy a Xiaomi Mi 11, right? It's a 5G enabled phone. And so, you're scrolling down, and we'll look at the specs here. Hello, specs. We're not scrolling to the specs for some odd reason. So let's just scroll down. Okay, so here we have network and connectivity, and it says network band supports 5G, 4G, 3G, 2G. And of course it shows 4G, 3G, and 2G, what it supports, blah, blah, blah. But what we're interested in is the 5G bands that it supports. So does this support millimeter wave? So, you're here on the me.com website, and it says 5G, N1, N3, N5, N7, blah, blah, N78, N79. Okay, so what the heck does that mean? Well, let's go to our old friend Wikipedia. 5G new radio frequency bands. So here you go, frequency range 1. This is the sort of the mid-range and lower frequencies, includes N1, N2, N3, N7, all the way up to, the N70s. What was it? Let's flip back here, N78 and N79. So here you have N78 and N79. That's 3.5 gigahertz and 4.7 gigahertz. You can see all the other frequencies that it supports, 2100, 2.1 gigahertz, 1.8 gigahertz, lower frequencies. Okay, well, none of these are actually millimeter wave. So let's scroll down a little more, and we go, okay, here's frequency range 2. These frequencies are 28 gigahertz, 41 gigahertz, 39, 47. That's millimeter wave, right? Okay, those are actually numbered. The bands are numbered N257 to N262. So we come back here and we go, oh, right. So it looks like this phone doesn't support millimeter wave. Right. But hang on a second. Because if we look at a different phone, the Samsung Galaxy S21, which is also a 5G phone, we come down here and we look at our specs, and we say where are we here? Scrolling down. Okay, here we are. 5G new radio. What does it support? 700 megahertz. You have the N numbers here, but they also conveniently tell you the frequencies. 850, 900, 1.8 gigahertz, 2.1 gigahertz, 2.3, 2.6, 3.5, 3.7. Again, Samsung Galaxy S21, no mention of millimeter wave. Okay, but hang on a second. Because this phone has the Samsung Exynos 2100. So we go to the Samsung website, and this is the Exynos 2100 page, and we look at specs, and right, it says 5G NR sub-6 gigahertz band up to 5.1 gigabits per second, 1.9 gigabits per second upload. Millimeter wave. So it appears that this Exynos 2100, i.e. the processor used in the Samsung Galaxy S21, does support millimeter wave. So maybe that means our Mi 11 also supports millimeter wave, even though it doesn't say right here. Well, no, actually, apparently it doesn't, because if we go over to Android Authority, and we search for millimeter wave, mmWave, mmWave, there we go. We have this paragraph here that says, on the wireless front, there's Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth, in other words, all the latest specs. The phone supports mid-band 5G, which means sub-6 gigahertz. There's no millimeter wave on this phone, but that's not a big loss. If you live in areas with 5G service, it's possible the phone will support the spectrum that your provider operates on. We were unable to test this feature. So here we have the Mi 11, which doesn't show that it supports millimeter wave, and in fact it appears that it does not. But then here we have the Samsung Galaxy S21, which also appears to not actually support millimeter wave, but the Samsung website says yes, it does. Right. So not only is millimeter wave not widely deployed, but if you just want to find out, right, the new phone I'm buying, does it actually have millimeter wave or not? It's nearly impossible to figure it out. I spent like an hour and a half looking for just these two phone models, just trying to figure out, like, look, does this support it or not? That's all I want to know. And it's almost like manufacturers are hiding the fact that their phones support millimeter wave or don't, which is a little bit odd. But it gets even worse than that, because what if I want to know where I live, is there 5G support? How difficult is that? Okay, now this depends on what country you live in. I live in France, so I can go to this website, ariaz.com. There's a whole ton of maps like this. You can find a bunch for your area, for your country. In this case, here you go. Here's a map. So I'll click View Map, and it's going to show me France. Now, this is actually 5G coverage. Now, if I zoom in on, say, like Paris, you can see, like, well, yeah, of course, Paris is a big city, like number of operators present 4. You can click on that, and it'll show you Orange, SFR, Free, and Bouygues are all supported in Paris. Obviously, the 4G coverage is most certainly there in Paris. But if I go kind of, like into the boondocks here, kind of like in the country, rural area, what do we have here? Well, let's click there. Yeah, it's only Free. Free is kind of the cheapy service. How about there? Oh yeah, it's free. You have these sort of like islands of 5G support. Free, free, free. So most of the providers in France do not have any 5G service. They certainly don't have wide coverage. It's just like a few major cities. The 4 major providers are all providing 5G service. Okay, but then the question is it millimeter wave 5G or not? It doesn't tell you that. So elsewhere on the same website, we have this, of course it's in French, but right, so it tells you the number of total 5G sites that the 4 main operators have, blah, blah, blah. And if we scroll down here, we read about the frequencies of the 5G systems that are being used. So this says basically what's happening is the 4 different providers here, these are the frequencies they're using. 3.7 to 3.8, 3.4 to 3.5, 3.5 to 3.6, about 3.5, 3.6 gigahertz. Then it notes that other 5G frequencies will be progressively used in the mobile network, blah, blah, blah. In short, what they're saying is that basically the millimeter wave is coming, but not yet. Right. So sure, there may be some millimeter wave here and there, but the vast majority of the 5G available in France is the sub-6 gigahertz variety. So, right. Wasn't that easy to figure out? No, it wasn't. I looked at for other countries, and it's kind of the same thing. It's nearly impossible to determine, like, look, are they using millimeter wave or not? I know in the US it's kind of easy. It's like Verizon, millimeter wave, boom. Like Chicago, boom, they got millimeter wave. They kind of made a big thing about it. In much of the world, they are using the sub-6 gigahertz band. The about 3.5 gigahertz. They are not using millimeter wave yet, and apparently the plan is, well, as we're moving forward in time, we're going to maybe slowly deploy millimeter wave, but recall that if they do that, they have to put like antennas on every single light pole down your street. And economically speaking, and even technically speaking, it's kind of unlikely that they're going to do that in rural areas, because that would be nuts. The amount of infrastructure required is like pretty crazy. And keep in mind that if you have 3.5 gigahertz, they're still talking about like 1 gigabit per second download speeds, which is faster than what most people have now, and they'll be plenty happy with it. That's faster than most people's internet connections. So, yeah. Plus, 5G itself is going to evolve over time, so you may never even see millimeter wave where you live, unless you live in a big city. There, it's pretty much guaranteed that they're going to roll it out at some point. But here, for example, in France, they're talking like, well, yeah, but it'll be like all big cities, like maybe around 2025, so 4 years from now. So, right, that's kind of good news, I guess, or you might think it's good news because at least they don't have, the millimeter wave thing everywhere. They are rolling out 5G, but in most parts of the world, it's the 3.5 gigahertz variety. So, well, that's good news, right? Yes and no. Well, it's good news for obvious reasons, but it's bad news because a viewer kindly sent me a link to a little paper, which I will show you now. It's quite interesting. So this is a 198-page paper from the European Parliament entitled Health Impact of 5G. It was a study they did released in July 2021, so just a couple months ago. And we can scroll down and we see that it's about the current state of knowledge of 5G-related carcinogenic and reproductive developmental hazards as they emerge from epidemiological studies and in vivo experimental studies. So they basically say, blah, 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 blah. Upcoming deployment of 5G will allow for all kinds of super whiz-bang stuff. At the same time, this is obviously going to be, increasing exposure. The 5G pioneer bands identified at EU level have the frequencies 700 MHz, 3.6 GHz, and 26 GHz. The first two frequencies are similar to those used for 2G to 4G technologies and have been investigated in both epidemiological and experimental studies for different endpoints, including carcinogenicity, and reproductive developmental effects, while the millimeter wave, the 26 GHz, and higher frequencies have not been adequately studied. Then they note that the IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, has classified radiofrequency EMF as possibly carcinogenic to humans and recently recommended RF exposure for reevaluation with high priority. That was, of course, 2 years ago. Since 2011, a great number of studies have been performed, both epidemiological and experimental, and the present review addresses the current knowledge regarding the negative health effects, blah, blah, blah. So their conclusions are that the lower frequencies, 450 megahertz to 6 gigahertz, EMF are probably carcinogenic for humans, in particular related to gliomas and acoustic neuromas. And for the millimeter wave, 24 to 100 gigahertz, no adequate studies were performed on the higher frequencies. Yes, there are reproductive effects for the existing frequencies, including the new sub-6 gigahertz band. These frequencies clearly affect male fertility and possibly female fertility too. They may have possible adverse effects on the development of embryos, fetuses, and newborns. And again, for millimeter wave, no adequate studies were performed on non-thermal effects of the higher frequencies. Yeah, so the good news is that millimeter wave is not quite as widespread as we may have feared. The other good news is that means they're using the lower frequencies, 2-3 gigahertz, for the new flavor of 5G in most places at the moment. The bad news is that even the European Parliament basically has come out and said, yeah, those crazy people who were worried about 2G, 3G, 4G, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, all that stuff? Yeah, they're not necessarily crazy. They may be onto something here. And then they also said, those people who are crazy because they're worrying about 5G? Yeah, not enough studies have been done, so, we need to look into this. Which is exactly what I and other people have been saying for years. But I'm not really holding my breath in terms of them actually doing anything about it. So we'll have to wait and see, but... And again, if you have any other studies or links or papers or whatever that you found, do send me either a message via the contact form on ScottiesTech.Info or just leave a comment below, because I'm always interested to read this stuff. This European Parliament paper, the study, it was published 2 months ago. I heard nothing about it, and I freaking live here. So it's it doesn't exactly make the front page of your local newspaper or CNN or anything like that. So anyway, we'll see what happens. For more techie tips, see ScottiesTech.Info. Thanks for watching. See you next time.